Good morning. This is a special edition of Saturday in America. I'm Molly Line, and we start with breaking news in the Middle East. Tensions are running high this morning as the U.S. military confirms it disabled another ship that tried to violate its blockade on ports in Iran. This comes as we get word President Trump is close to making a decision about conducting a massive attack on the country. Chief International Correspondent Steve Harrigan is live in Tel Aviv with the very latest. Hi, Steve.
Molly, quiet in the skies after 13 straight nights of attacks by U.S. forces against Iranian military sites inside of Iran. No strikes overnight. Last night, President Trump talking quite a bit in recent days about a possible massive attack against Iran, but the president making clear that all options for the U.S. remain open. Here's President Trump.
Should we expect to see major strikes?
Look, we're talking to them right now. I think they're getting more and more serious as the days go by, for maybe the obvious reason. But we are talking to them right now. Look, there are two ways. I consider that the smarter way, but the other is probably the easier way, doing what we're doing. And we can take that to a much higher level if we want to. You know, we're prepared to do that, as you know. We're locked and loaded. We're locked and loaded and ready to go.
There was military action in the Gulf of Oman, where, of course, the U.S. has a naval blockade on all Iranian ports. A merchant ship tried to run that blockade. It was rebuffed and warned 4 separate times before CENTCOM reports. They fired into the engine room of that merchant ship. That ship was disabled. Molly, back to you.
Steve Harrigan, thank you, reporting on the escalating tensions there in the Middle East. And for more on the war with Iran, let's bring in retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub. Sir, thanks for joining us this morning. Steve Harrigan setting us up nicely there, talking about how this continues to be a challenge in the Strait of Hormuz and in the region. And now it looks like potential expansion of the conflict could be underway. The Houthis being drawn in, Saudi Arabia conducting several strikes there on the naval area, trying to drive them back after a strike on a Saudi Arabian ship. What do you make of the conflict? Is it expanding, and do you have concerns about expansion?
Well, Molly, it looks like it is expanding a little bit, and that's no surprise. I think it's also right to be concerned about that, because there's a part of this that Iran wanted, because they want to expand this conflict beyond the borders. They want to inflame a greater part of the Middle East potentially in this larger conflict, and that's part of the Iranian playbook. But with that risk comes an opportunity, as well as some of these nations decide that they've had enough of standing by on the sidelines as well. And so when it comes to like the Houthi rebels in Yemen, they were planted there basically as an influence means, not only over the Suez Canal region, but to counter Saudi Arabia, who Iran eventually wanted to dominate as well. So I think Saudi Arabia taking on the Houthis themselves is a net benefit. But we just have to also be careful to make sure that we do our best to keep our alliances strong and make sure that any expansion doesn't turn into something advantageous to the Iranians.
It does seem that there's a distinct effort underway on the part of the Houthis, and of course they're an Iranian proxy, to cause a lot of challenges when it comes to commercial shipping. And already these recent Houthi strikes theoretically may force more vessels to take the long way around through the Suez Canal and further disrupt the global economy in essence. The Secretary of State Marco Rubio has talked about really wishing our European partners would get more involved in securing the Strait of Hormuz and involved in this overall conflict, ultimately creating peace for the entire global shipping community, to step up those measures. Your thoughts on if that is a step that we will actually see?
You know, that's a step I certainly wish we should see or would see, but I don't find it too highly likely. I mean, we're going to see little changes like what's happened with the United Kingdom and authorizing some limited basing rights again for strikes against Iran, and that's a positive measure. And so when you take these individual nations and their actions, there will certainly be some who realize what's truly going on. But if you were to, you know, if you were to cut off successfully the oil coming through Suez into southern Europe per se, they might recognize the threat a little bit better and maybe get involved a little bit more. But I don't anticipate too much involvement from Europe going forward. I think we best keep going generally the way we have been. And if they do join, great. But I wouldn't make a plan that is based on their joining us at all.
President Trump will be meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he comes to America next week. What do you make of that as the diplomatic efforts continue? And this is a key diplomatic ally, and now seeing pretty high-level meetings between these leaders. As we know, Hezbollah is also something we're keeping a very close eye on.
Yeah, I think the meeting is a good thing ultimately, and this is about keeping alliances together. It's about keeping us moving the same direction and making sure that we don't understand assumptions through either media or maybe bad messaging. There's just nothing like face to face. And as Trump, mulls over and thinks about whether or not to expand the strikes, and Israel looks at what's going on with southern Lebanon, which could be a very positive thing in the end, we just want to make sure we're all operating on the same page, because Iran is operating out of a playbook, and they've been following that playbook that they've built for decades, and it's no surprise to any of us who've been watching this. So we have to make sure we can counter what they're doing. And having Netanyahu come to the United States and be part of that. And I suspect there will be some very pointed discussions about what the future could hold as far as this conflict is concerned. I think it's a positive thing that he's coming here.
Yeah. As we continue these diplomatic efforts, Ron never sits down at the table with us. Instead, we're going through third-party countries and trying to get information back and forth and trying to see how serious they are about ultimately negotiating. But in the meantime, despite the incredible impact they've seen to their military and to their naval assets and the continued focus on driving them back in the Strait of Hormuz and their efforts there, they do continue to strike significant infrastructure across the Middle East, including at our partners, for instance, water desalination plants, which are critical in that area, striking our close allies and neighbors in the region. What do you make of their continued ability to do that, despite the very significant military strikes, most recently over the last 13 days, though apparently a bit of a pause over last evening?
Well, ultimately, this is them knowing that they're not going to win militarily, just force on force. This is them moving and using what military forces they have available to engage in the public relations war and the war on what the world sees them able to do. So you don't see the hundreds of missiles barrages. You don't see things like that occurring against Israel or the neighboring nations. You see one or two here and there, whether it be missiles or drones or something else. And their goal ultimately is not to achieve a strategic military victory against us specifically or the greater Middle East. It's to show that they're still alive. It's to show their people that they're still in power. It's to occasionally attack something to show the world that, hey, look, we're capable. And with all the cameras turned on that one missile hitting the one ship or that one site, everybody fills in the blank essentially and says, ooh, Iran still has a lot of military capability left, and they're sending a message to the world that they're still there. But what they're not sending is that they're militarily capable of doing what they did at the beginning of this conflict back in February.
Yeah, and this administration has made clear that the ultimate goal was to ensure that Iran cannot ever get a nuclear weapon. And of course, many allies in the Middle East know that that would be catastrophic as well. But there is the question, as Peter Doocy was asking the president this just yesterday, what is the exit plan? What do you think the most effective exit plan would be to end this conflict?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the very hard questions that should be asked. And the exit plan should have been written into the plan from the beginning. And I have no doubt that it ultimately was somewhere. And that's tied to exactly what are the strategic objectives and how do you define when you've achieved those? Because if our objective was not an actual regime and ideological change in Iran, but to make sure they couldn't be a bully to the greater Middle East, then that is a completely different answer than a regime change that would involve potentially almost a generational change inside Iran and the Iranian people stepping up. Right now, what it looks like to me, as far as any kind of an exit plan is concerned, is Iran kind of back in a box, not able to pursue nuclear weapons, not able to threaten the greater region around them as much as they were before. And if it's limited to that, I think we can achieve that fairly quickly. If it's beyond that to regime change and ideological change in Iran and trying to get the Iranian people to step up again against their own government, that's a much longer solution. And I'm not sure the American people are ready to first understand that and to invest in it.
Yeah, and concerns now as we look for this exit that there are some more doors opening, for instance, what we're seeing with the Houthis. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub, thank you very much for joining us this morning and for offering your insights as we continue to watch this conflict. We appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.